glad to see everybody here today. So you will all gather around. We will start our meeting. Matt is still seeing it. 10:03, probably 10:04 now. Before we get started, we have a few announcements to make. One is that we do not meet in July, so everybody have a nice break and write all the good words, and we will see you in August. I want to encourage you, every single one of you, to enter our Beneath the Lubbock Skies Anthology, and please go to the website and look for any of the information that you may need to help get your entry in. The deadline is July 31st. Okay. And we are really excited about this project. It's something that Wade at Barnes & Noble was saying that he needed. He needed more Lubbock-based books and our West Texas area books. So we really want to have a large number of people that enter. So we're real excited about that. Okay, the next thing is that if you did not bring your suitcase today for our suitcase drive, don't worry about it. I want you to go ahead and bring one up here probably next week. We'll send something out. We're gonna do a drive in the parking lot for about 2 hours for the community. It's hopefully we'll get more suitcases. But if you're not familiar with what our drive is about, our suitcase drive is for foster kids at Low Christian or at Low Children's Home, excuse me. And the foster care program, sometimes kids come to their program and all of their belongings are in a black plastic sack. And so we're gathering gently used suitcases and duffel bags. I got the cutest duffel bag. It's just a knockover. So anyway, and also classic children's books and drawing supplies. If you've got an extra sketchbook or some colored pens or pencils, we want to encourage kids in their artistic endeavors as well as their reading. So sometimes just one little push in the right direction will make a reader for life or an artist for life, or hopefully both. So, okay, and the next thing we've got is we have Miss KJ is going to announce the winner of the book contest from the Barnes & Noble Book Fair.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out and supporting us. We sold, not our money, but at Barnes & Noble during the 3 days we had our book fair, Barnes & Noble reported that we sold over $9,000 worth of stuff. So that is because you all came out and supported us. We really appreciate that. We will get a portion of that money, questionable, because some of it was also online, which I don't have that number. So that money will come back to our board, hopefully to help us with raffles and some other cool things. Thank you for the support. So we had a book cover contest out in the entryway just outside of Barnes & Noble, and we had about, I think we had 11 people submit, and we have 3 winners. We have a first place, second place, and third place. Anyone who wanted could vote, 1 vote per day, and so I know people that came to the signing were voting. We had some people who are teachers and have every human in the world come and maybe did well in this contest. So anyway, I just want to give you the winners. In third place, and I don't have his book because he wanted it back, is Patrick Hanford's The Desperation of Marla Adams. Yes. Hey, Patrick, good job. In second place, is Jefferson's book, Hal Duro, The Lighthouse Race. He had a whole bunch of reviews. Just having sign up in the kids area. He sent them all for a farmer's market. I said, you should come. He's like, I can't yet. I was like, okay. And in first place is Jenny Andrews. Come on up here with her book, Good Talk, Good Talk. This is her raunchy, racked get on the front cover with her hair. And she has won a $25 Barnes & Noble gift card. Second place is $15 and third place is $10. So thank you for your support on that event. It was great and we had a great time.
Guys, I just want to say, I didn't win because my book cover. I only won because I threatened my friends and family. So I came to all y'all's wedding showers, and baby showers, and kids' birthdays, and single people need their day too. So those things, so y'all can come out.
Are you into
All my friends.
I've decided I need a wedding shower. I'm not married. I'm not getting married, but I need new sheets and towels. I would also like to introduce our friend Lauren, and she is going to be our author spotlight today. So, Miss Lauren, if you would come up here, and we want to hear about some of the stuff going on.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be back up here again. Speaking of showers, I have a sister-in-law. My husband is the youngest of 6 children, all 5 girls, and he's the youngest, the only boy. Spoiled rotten. I got him, and he's worthless. But one of his sisters has been married 5 times. And she says, I love getting married. I just don't like being married. So she definitely believes in wedding showers. I want to thank Mathis. I want to give him a real quick shout out. Those of y'all who've not done this author spotlight, he sent me such a lovely list of questions, ideas, things to talk about, and it was just really appreciated. I was like, I can do this, I can do this. I had hoped to have a lot of visual aids today, but darn it, I had to go to Corpus Christi this past week and spend the week on the beach, so the visual aids got pushed by the wayside. Sorry, we'll just talk it through. I actually had a point that I wanted to make today, and y'all know me that it's very difficult for me to stay on point, so I actually wrote down some of the things that I wanted to share with you, because I did kind of have something I've been feeling strongly about that I wanted to share with you guys. I am Lauren Castle Brownell. By day, I am the Director of Marketing and Communications at Texas Tech University. By night, well, we're just not going to talk about that, but that's my day job. Recently, one of the things that has been very time-consuming and has kept me from writing, I just finished a very intensive 10-week course in which I became a certified digital marketing scientist. Ooh! Best use of my time and money that I have done in a long time. This is the way the world is going. I've been in marketing my entire career, and that's been a while. The world has changed so dramatically. I started out in the newspaper business back when we had newspapers, and so the world has definitely changed. And taking that course, again, I think it is so beneficial. I think it's something that I know it's going to benefit me in my day job. I hope to be able to put together a presentation here in the next few months to share some of the things that I've learned about digital marketing. I think that as writers, we focus a lot on book marketing platforms, and I think there's a huge opportunity for us to make our stand in the bigger social media world. It's just a very exciting time. You don't have to be crazy about AI. You don't have to sell your soul to the devil to utilize social media and digital marketing. So that's one of the best things I've done for myself, and I think for my career and my writing life lately. Okay, back to business. See, I got off track. Okay, I've been doing a lot of soul searching lately, so this may be a different author spotlight than you guys are used to. I'm not here to sell anything. I'm not here to tell you about my latest work. Okay, maybe a little bit about my latest work. I am finally making headway on republishing Zen and the Art of Housekeeping. When I last spoke with you guys a year and a half ago, when I really got introduced to this group and came as a speaker, found my people. I was in discussions with Simon & Schuster. This book was originally published traditionally through Simon & Schuster. I was in discussions with them at the time to do a second edition possibly through them. That fell through because they couldn't find a Zen housekeeping influencer to write a new foreword. Duh. I'm the Zen housekeeping influencer. I'm not, it's not something that's out there. But I was like, a little disappointed, but really not. Because it gave me the opportunity. I now have this book. It is mine to do with what I want to do as I self-publish it. And I'm really, really, really excited about that opportunity. I've had a new cover designed. It has been formatted for print. I'm waiting for the EPUB files to get it out there in the world. But then I'm getting to do some really cool stuff that I wouldn't have gotten to do if it had been traditionally published. I am doing a workbook to go along with, to be a companion piece to this. This book has exercises at the end of every chapter. It has try lists, think about this. So I've pulled all those things out and I've put them into a workbook format and put lots of thought-provoking quotes, concepts. How do you feel about your life? How do you feel about your stuff? And I think that's going to be a really, really nifty thing to go along with this book. Really excited about that. And then throughout this book, I have breakout boxes, and they have different subjects. One is Buddha says, that is Buddhist quotes. One is living one with nature. And so the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out all the living one with nature sections. It's basically recipes to make your own cleaning products from stuff that's lying around your house. Vinegar, baking soda, these are the best cleaning tools out there. And so I pulled all those sections out, and I'm doing basically a little cookbook of green cleaning recipes. And I'm going to utilize that as a reader magnet on my website. Download your Living One with Nature cookbook after you sign up for my newsletter. So I'm really excited to have the opportunity to do some neat, different things that kind of were always in my mind. But as long as it was Simon & Schuster calling the shots, I wasn't free to do that. So I really don't mind at all. My relationship with Simon & Schuster was wonderful. Traditional publishing for me was great. But I'm glad to have this back in my hands to make it what I want it to be. So that's really exciting. I am also, the last time we visited, I talked about traditional versus self-publishing. The jury was still out on Wild Lark books. The jury is in. That was one of the worst mistakes I ever made in my entire life. And if anybody has any affiliation with Wild Lark books at this point, run, don't walk. Get out. If anybody needs to talk with me further after this, they are certainly...
Counseling sessions with Laura.
Absolutely, I would be more than happy. Honestly, the downfall of that relationship really did put me into a state of real writer's block. I was like, I felt really bad after things happened. And it took me a while to want to get back in the game. It took me a while to want to write again. It took me a while to think about trusting people that were wanting to give me advice. So I am available for counseling. If anybody's had a difficult relationship with Wild Lark books, I would be more than happy to share all my experiences. The one thing I feel bad about was that I stood up here and said, no, everything's gone pretty well for me. And then the plane hit the fan. So that's that. But the joy of that is I also have back the rights to Dying to Donate, and I am also ready to republish this book again and do what I want with it and make it what I want it to be. So that's a very, very good, positive thing. Okay, so this is kind of where the soul searching comes in. Have I already gone past 10 minutes, Mathis? Okay. So it's 10 minutes, so I can't say my name. Okay, so I was beating my head against the wall. I was trying to force myself to write the next book, the sequel to Dying to Donate. I have a title. It's called Sigma Doesn't Die. All of these take place on a university campus because I just kept saying to myself, somebody ought to write a book about this, and so I said it might as well be me. So all of these take place on a West Texas college campus that is not Texas Tech. I had a big idea where I wanted Harper Fox, my main character, to go, but I was miserable. I thought back over the 5 years that it took me to slog through writing Dying to Donate. It wasn't fun. I didn't really enjoy it. What was fun was zipping off a quick essay on the season of American Horror Story and having it published in Drunk Monkey's literary magazine. It is true. I can now say that I have been published by Drunk Monkeys, and that's one of the great joys of my life. Writing a food column was fun. I wrote a food column for the Jacksonville Times-Union, one of the biggest newspapers in Florida. This was one of my first assignments, No Ordinary Easter. I got to go around to businesses and talk about unique Easter foods one year. I got to write about meals that I enjoyed. I got to write about books that talked about food. And I got to just share my thoughts directly with readers about real things that were happening to me, real things that had moved me. This one was airline's decision upsets her stomach. Continental will begin charging for food on domestic flights. I'm dating myself because you know how long ago that was that they first charged for food. But I was pissed, you know, I was not a happy camper. But it was so great to be able to just talk about those things. Eating clean for a good cause. You know, I got to talk about anything and everything. One of my favorite food columns was, what are your essential ingredients? There's a book, Essential Ingredients, by, I don't want to say it wrong, Erica Baumeister. One of my favorite books of all time, The School of Essential Ingredients. And it talked about, it was this group of people that came together for cooking classes, and they discovered all these things about themselves. What are your essential ingredients? And one of my very favorite food columns that I got to write. I also, and I'm really not joking about the Drunk Monkeys, it really is a literary magazine now. And I really did publish an article about American Horror Story. So, I did a lot of writing for parenting magazines. I started doing this when I was younger and had small children. And I wrote a lot about this newfangled thing that was affecting parents so profoundly at the time, which was social media. It was just coming onto the scene. And I was like, this is going to change the way we parent. And so this article appeared in Miami Family Magazine, Media Psychology for Moms, you know, tips to get a handle on your kids' use of social media. And I really leaned into that for a long time because it affected every aspect of my life as a mom and my children's lives. I have published in Canada. Calgary Child is one of my favorite markets that I've published in. So I'm an international writer, you know, which I do put on my resume, of course, you know, international author. But those things were really, really fun. I have also written 2 short plays that have both been produced here at local community theaters. You've not lived until you've seen an actor speak your words. It's just amazing. Both of my plays are, for the most part, really autobiographical. I think so much of the work that we write and we call it fiction is because we need to get something off our chests. And so we see ourselves there. So it was profound. I realized that I didn't really feel like focusing on the sequel to Dying to Donate. I felt like focusing on the sequel to Sin and the Art of Housekeeping, a book that I wrote almost 20 years ago. And I'm a totally different person than I was then. And yet when I'm strung out, when I don't know what to do, when I don't know what the answers are, I still find myself at my kitchen sink washing dishes, which is where I first had the idea for that book. So the feelings that I felt then are the same feelings that I have now. It's trying to make order out of chaos. And that just, I don't know, it just resonated with me so much that was what I wanted to be working on right now, was how, almost 20 years later, Am I still trying to make order out of chaos, even though the world has changed and become maybe even more chaotic than we could have imagined? So I was very inspired by Dee Burks, our speaker last month. I just thought she was amazing, and I walked out here fired up. I was ready to take on the world. She gave us an outline. Every nonfiction book, here's the things, here's what the different chapters should be. You ask 3 questions in each, you write 1,000 words on each. I was like, I can do that. And so now I have this great outline, and I'm forging ahead with the sequel to Zen and the Art of Housekeeping. The title of the sequel is The Existential Vacuum Sucks. I'm hoping the Drunk Monkeys will maybe serialize it or something. I've known that was the title of this book since I wrote this one, but I never captured the motivation, the spirit of what I wanted to say, and now I have. And so it's fun to get up and write again. It's a joy to be focused on this. I also brought out an old project that had lain dormant, and I'm really, really excited about it. It's called The Drama Mama's Guide to Life. I raised not 1 but 2 theater kids. I myself was a theater kid. I am an actress as well as a writer, as well as a marketing professional, as well as a mom, as well as a wife. And I felt like there were a lot of people whose kids get into theater and they just didn't know anything. And it's like, I can help these people. I can tell them kind of some of the ins and outs. It's how to help support your child, be artistic, be involved in the arts, and you not turn into a stage mother, because stage mother is a 4-letter word. We don't want that. And so the Drama Mama's Guide to Life is really just kind of a how-to manual, how to be a good supporter of your creative children without turning into a monster. I am now going to write the sequel to that, and it's going to be The Sports Mom. I did that too, and I think there's a good market for a sports mom book. How to be supportive of your kids and not get kicked out, not wrestle a referee to the ground. I mean, there's some important tips, I think, that are going to be there. But yeah, that's going to be a short project. I can sell it for 99 cents. It's just something that I want to put out in the world because I think it can help people. I've got several essays in various stages of development. I'll submit them to magazines. I'll submit them to literary journals. Maybe I'll create a collection of essays to publish someday. But I'm in love with writing again. It feels good when something that meant so much to you for so long and it just kind of dies on the vine for whatever reason. I mean, I felt kind of lost. It's like I really don't know what to do with these thoughts that are in my head, So getting them out in whatever format. I truly do believe that truth is stranger than fiction, and that's why I love it. I recently read a quote from Tom Clancy who said the difference between fiction and reality, fiction has to make sense. A wonderful novel I just finished and I recommend highly is called Home by Penny Parks. And a character in there said, this was no time to shy away from her innate talents and experiences. This was the time to embrace everything she had learned and to finally have the courage to share it. And that's where I am. I finally have the courage to share it. I did not mean for this to become counseling session. I'm almost done. Not everyone was meant to write the great American novel, or even to write novels at all, and that does not make them less of a writer. It makes them true to themselves. So I guess for my author spotlight today, I want to shine a light on not being afraid to try something different, not being afraid to be true to yourself, not being afraid to switch directions halfway through your journey, write short, write in a different genre, listen to the writer in your head and in your heart, and that is where you will find the truth for yourself as a writer, even if that truth is stranger than fiction.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I just had a message I wanted to share.
We are so excited that our sweet Linda has brought to us today Dr. Katie And we'd like for Linda to come up and introduce her, please.
Morning. I have so many things running in my head. So we have Dr. Cortese. She's one of the top professors in education writing, creative writing, focused in Texas Tech University. And she happens to be my committee, my dissertation committee chair. So she's very wonderful. The first time I had her class, that was in my first semester here in 2024. She was just awesome, like in the way she was critiquing, our stories and all of that. And I was like, okay, definitely she's going to be my chair. So I don't have much to say, but she's the author of 2 books. Yeah, and she's going to tell us about space-based fiction for our anthology. I hope everybody's getting ready with your stories. Yeah, so she's going to do a wonderful job to tell us just so more light on how we can write about Lubbock and be that light for Lubbock. So welcome, Dr. Katie Cortese.
Hello, thank you so much for having me here. Thank you, Linda, for making this connection. I talked to the group a million years ago in 2013, I think it was, about residencies and MFAs, I think. I'm not sure if anybody here now was in the group then, but I don't. It was at the library. It was at the I'm Katie Cortese, as Linda said. I teach mostly fiction, short fiction, specifically usually to undergraduates and graduate students in the English department here at Tech. I'm also the faculty director at Texas Tech University Press, which some of you may know. They usually go to the Lubbock Book Festival, so if anybody wanders around there, usually John Rock has a table there, and I think John is also a member of this group. I know he told me he probably couldn't make it today, but he said, oh, I thought that you were on the program. So I work with him regularly as well. I guess, I don't know if there's anything else you need to know about me. Mostly I write Linda mentioned my 2 books. My first book is flash fiction, so hearing about writing short, absolutely, I'm all about that. My second book are like long, I guess more traditionally length short story. And I'm working on a novel which I've turned in 3 novel drafts to my agent so far, and I've published their own novels, so I'm just plugging away at my 4th draft and trying that out. So, like not everybody's meant to write a novel, and maybe some people take their entire career to figure it out, and then you have to figure it out all over again. So I'm resigned to that, and it's okay. It's the process is fascinating and different every time. So I'm trying to teach myself things as I'm teaching students things. And when I do talk about this place-based fiction, I also wanted to make clear that this is sort of, everything has a caveat, right? There are as many ways to write as there are writers, and so I don't mean to dictate or anything. A lot of this comes from like my experience and best practices, or seeing writers either have success or struggle with certain things. So just kind of collated them. But if something doesn't work for you, just cast it off and don't worry about it. But these are just sort of some general thoughts that I have about setting in place, which I'm kind of going to use interchangeably. And when I use either setting or place, I'm kind of thinking of like the immersive surroundings that any character in a work of fiction or in a work of nonfiction, if it's creative nonfiction, and there's people interacting with the place that they might be surrounded by. And so I'll talk a lot about like using 5 senses, actually 6 senses, since we have intuition, which I consider to be one of the things that fiction on the page has that you can't really get in the same way from many other arts, right? Because even if you're watching a movie and it has a voiceover, like there's always a little bit awkward to like insert the voiceover, like this echoey kind of like overarching interruption from what else is happening, right? But when you're reading on the page, you can kind of see how somebody feels and thinks as well as what they say, which might completely contradict what they said, right? And anybody in any kind of situation is always somewhere, right? So I know that it might be, I used a white background, which means that it's a little harder to see maybe with the light, but I will read out the quote in case you can't see it. So Jerome Stern is somebody who preceded me at the institution where I was most recently, which was Florida State. That was, I don't know if it's not really recent now, but I was there, I think 2008 to 2012, and 2013. And he wrote a book called Making Shapely Fiction, which I recommend. It's a little bit dated now, but it has a lot of good advice about kind of the shapes of fiction and kind of the patterns and that sort of emerge accidentally sometimes. And he says in that book something that kind of informs my own writing and my teaching practice, which is that nothing happens nowhere. A scene that seems to happen nowhere seems not to happen at all. Right, so this is kind of like a caution against having characters so excited about their ideas that they just kind of talk in a nowhere's land. You know, no place, right, where there's nothing to inform them or interact with them. Right, in real life, everything around a character is in motion in the same way that a character is in motion. Right, so there are sounds that are interceding. There are smells. Right, like if you're walking in the neighborhood, somebody's cutting their grass, or like there's, you know, somebody's dog is doing their business, right? There's all kinds of things that are interrupting in some way, whether or not the character registers it in speech, but there's these kind of active things going on. And so that's kind of what I mean when I'm talking about place or setting, this interactive environment that any kind of action might take place in. I tried to put a couple of resources in here. Another really great book that is specifically about place is called, place and setting, is called Maps of the Imagination, the writer as a cartographer. And this is by Peter Churchy, who teaches at the University of Houston in their creative writing program. And what he says in that book is to ask for a map is to say, tell me a story. Right? And if you think about it, that seems pretty true to me. Anytime that you look at a map, a flat map, a topographical map, or you know, Google Earth or something, right? There's all of these, you know, roads that intersect, or these rivers that cut through and have shaped whatever towns they go through, right? So just in a general sense, where something takes place matters, right? I mean, if you're going to have a marriage proposal, like at Niagara Falls, that might mean something, but a marriage proposal, like in a bathroom on a plane, means something totally different, maybe, right? So wherever you set something influences what happens and who it happens to and why it happened there. So it's just another element you can play with to influence your reader to feel something different depending on what's happening, right? It will shift. So in my experience, or my opinion, I'm going to go into all of the elements that come down under setting should in a little more detail. So I'm not going to talk about them in great detail now. I'll just list some of the things. But I'm just curious, when you're writing your own fiction or your nonfiction that has scenes, a lot of nonfiction obviously does use the same tools as fiction, what do you think a setting should do or can do? What are the potentials for setting? Yeah, absolutely. Set the mood. So, connected to that genre, right? So, like sometimes you can know from the first paragraph, like, oh, I'm in a mystery right now. This is definitely a mystery, or this is a romance, right? Like sometimes just from where something takes place, right? I haven't read the Bridgerton novels, but it's from what I understand, and that's not because I have time, because I have 3 small children, not because I eschew romance or anything like that. But from what I understand, there's a lot of balls and interactions between people who may be courting or may not be, right? And it seems to me that would be pretty apparent from the style of the writing, but also from where these things take place, right? These events that are set up specifically to put like young people in proximity with each other, right? So any other things that setting does, or that you specifically want it to do, or try to make it do, or think that it should do?
My setting gave secondary characters places to live, basically. It's a town square, and there's businesses that have fascinating characters behind each door.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of goes back to the idea of a map,
yes.
like being, having a story embedded in it, right? Where people live and who's next door to who, right? Like those dynamics kind of, who's talking over the fence and who's like worrying about like edging their lawn specifically next to somebody who doesn't take care of theirs, right? Like those tensions can spring up just because of the physical proximity, right? Yeah.
Well, if you're sitting like an outer space science fiction, and you're in, you shouldn't say, it could be here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think of, Space Odyssey, right? Like HAL. I mean, that's like the ship itself and the kind of like AI personality that it takes on becomes a major influence on what happens in that story. Absolutely.
Could it help like hinder a character, for example, if your character has Frodo mounted?
Yeah, absolutely. A physical obstacle that's rooted in the environment that is keeping the person or challenging the character from like self-actualizing or completing their task or something like that. So the example of Mount Doom or any kind of like physical obstacle that's like kind of baked into the setting absolutely can be used to kind of double as the character either becoming or failing to become, who they want to be and achieving their goal or not. Yeah.
It also dictates the culture. Like if you're in the mountains of Italy, there's the speech and the socioeconomics and the clothing and the weather and everything.
Absolutely, yeah. The cultural norms of a place, and which can be, and I've kind of broken down in a second, you'll see, to cultural norms and also to regionalisms, right? Because there are, there's regionalisms that kind of might apply broadly, right? Like I'm from Massachusetts, as you can probably tell by my accent, I'm not Texas. So if I were to say, like, how are y'all doing? Like that would obviously be like an affectation, right? That would be me trying to tap into some kind of like, existing regional norm here that I really don't have access to, even though I kind of like to because it's a really useful word, right? Like, and all y'all, like the way that you can like, it's just like every time I say it, I'm like, ooh, I'm like, gonna like shed my northeastern sensibility or something in order to pull that off, right? And that regionalism like supersedes whatever other kind of cultural norms might be under that umbrella, right? Like that are dictated by like, I don't know, ethnicity or religion or just kind of a family's way of defining themselves and understanding themselves, right? Which you might have like certain words that mean something in your family but not in other families, right? Inside jokes and that kind of thing, right? So I'm just gonna list these out and we'll talk about them in more detail in a moment. So I think setting should establish time, right, for one thing, and I'll talk about all the variations on that word, time. What might that include? Place, right? We talked about like whether it's the mountains of Italy or whether it's Mount Doom or whether it's a spaceship, right? There's got to be some physical location, which doesn't have to be a technically real location. I mean, if you think about it, when you're writing fiction, you're always recreating whatever environment you're trying to describe. If somebody was going to describe this room, which seems like pretty real, right? Depending on where you're sitting in the room, you're probably going to describe it differently because somebody's way back there and the screen's going to look smaller. Somebody's right up front, they might feel like they're being swallowed by it, right? So even if you're describing the same space, having a certain perspective on it is going to change the way that that space is represented. So you're always kind of world building, even if it's a world that people think they know or have access to. Inventory, so this is like props, like the physical things that are located in a place. Cultural cues, right? Absolutely. Regionalisms, we talked about. And also, setting can include variations from expectation, right? So if I say, like, I'm going to walk into church or something, then I might have an idea about, like, what might be located in a church. So, like, I don't know, maybe there's a piano or a stained glass window or pews, right? But not necessarily. Not if I walk into, like, a temple, right? I've actually never been in a temple, so I don't actually know what might be in that physical location. I would have to go there to see. And it would, if I say church and you think stained glass window, but then I say, like, oh, the room was like bare and there were chairs around the edge because it's like a Quaker meeting house or something, right? And that's going to shift your expectation or the stereotype that you have associated with that word. And setting can do that, should do that, is defy our immediate expectations. Okay, so things that I think setting should probably not do. The first is just exist in the background like a backdrop. Like, go to see the Nutcracker, and the performance that they have with the Buddy Holly Hall is a really great performance, and their settings are not necessarily just, there's like, it's very technical, right? There's lighting, and there's scrims, and but they fly in certain things sometimes, depending if it shifts every year, right? But sometimes they'll just, drop basically a curtain that has like a painted on Christmas tree, or like painted on gifts, and it's kind of like a suggestion of what might be in the background, and you understand, okay, it's a Christmas party, and then I'm going to focus on the dancing. But in a work of fiction, you have the opportunity to make that setting dynamic. So it's not just hanging out there, but maybe, you know, like the Christmas tree's rattling, and you realize the cat has started climbing up the, you know, the center of it and is knocking the star off the top or something, right? There's things that the characters or who they're interacting with can change what the setting does, and the setting can also impinge on the characters, right? Like if there's a storm coming that's cloudy outside, right? The storm can arrive at some point, so it should probably not just be in the background. Setting should not rely on stereotypes, right? So we were talking about this with that example of church, is that sometimes it's useful to tap into like, oh, I'm riding in a taxi, and you kind of understand what that means. You're probably in the back seat. There might be some kind of partition between you and the driver. There might not be, maybe there's like one of those trees hanging from the rearview mirror, right? That's kind of like filling the atmosphere with this sort of like fake evergreen scent, right? And you can use that if you need it. If your character is like, I really have to have this intense conversation and I'm in the taxi, and you can kind of just like rely on, you know, like what your reader would probably assume about that place while they have that conversation, as long as you're interacting with the sensory. But you can also undercut it, right? Like maybe it's like the cleanest taxi that you've ever been in, like a luxury taxi, you know? Like there's water for you and chocolates in the back seat, and all of a sudden the conversation becomes less important because, you know, you get too comfortable or something, your character gets too comfortable. So you can kind of shift, again, those expectations. Setting should probably not always exhaustively describe everything, right? So it's important to know that, say, like the sofa is leather, and that the person who's come to visit has brought their 6 children, and they're like, you know, precariously opening glasses of grape juice over the fancy sofa, then that's important to know, you know, like maybe what it's made of, or how new it is, or how expensive it is, perhaps. But if we're in this room and the conversation is much more important, and it's kind of like, okay, this is like a middle-class house with like a flowered, you know, sofa from the 1970s, like that might be all we need to know about it. Everyone's kind of settling in, and we can kind of get it in an instant. We don't necessarily need to hear about, you know, the steam ring or the springs creaking and those kinds of things, right? So it's only kind of on a need-to-know basis. We don't necessarily have to have a big influx of description every time we enter a new space. Usually setting is not the dominant element all the way through a narrative, right? So unless you're reading like some kind of 19th century, and sometimes, you know, like Charles Dickens or somebody who got paid by the word, right? Like maybe there's like a little bit of effusiveness about a place that kind of makes it seem like Bleak House, right? Like something that makes it evident that the setting is a character unto itself, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But usually, you want the plot, you want the characters to be more important than the world they're surrounded by, as long as they're interacting with it. There are a couple of exceptions. I don't know if anyone has read that Ray Bradbury short story called There Will Come Soft Rains. Has anybody read that one? I think it's in the Martian Chronicles, but it basically opens with a house, and you're kind of waiting for the people to come, but the house is beeping, there's some kind of alarm going off, and then the more you kind of get into the world, the only sort of moving character is a dog, and the dog is not doing well, the dog is injured, and you kind of realize eventually that it's a house after like a nuclear apocalypse, and it's what we would call a smart house now. Of course, this was sort of a long time ago, but the house has been automated and is slowly dying. And so the house does become character in that instance. It's not just the physical location. The physical location is wedded not just to what's happened, but to the absence of the people who caused what happened, right? And so in that case, it's like, you can still argue that the house isn't really the dominant setting because the people made it and the people are gone, and that's kind of the point of the story, right? Is that they destroyed themselves. Setting should not remain static, right? We can interact with it, it can change. Time is always passing as people interact, even if it's passing really slowly. Setting should not disappear, right? So that guy who does the chicken rotisserie, like a set it and forget it guy, right? So you don't want to necessarily like say, hey, here it is, and then never return to it, right? Because again, time is passing, things are changing. So checking in every once in a while with the world will make usually seem more dynamic. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about those do's, the things that settings can include that often do, that might be useful to think about as you're writing or revising fiction or nonfiction. Okay, so the idea of time. Time, we think about maybe just checking your wristwatch, but there's a little bit more to it. Inventory, we'll get to that one. Place was the other one, and then cultural cues and regional symbols kind of combined, and then variations from expectations. So thinking about time, first we've got the historical moment that we're in, the cultural moment. So it could be the now, it could be 15 minutes from now, 300 years from now, it could be 300 years ago, right? But understanding kind of like the era that we're in is going to change a lot, and that I consider that part of setting, part of place. Season and weather, right, will change a lot depending on whether we're, strolling in Lubbock like midday today when it's supposed to be 98 degrees versus like midday in January when there's ice everywhere, right? It's going to change whatever kind of conversation, whatever kind of interaction depending on what's going on outside. The time of day also can be important. Morning people, evening people. And how fast time is passing is also, I think, an element of setting. So sometimes this can be, taking like 1 second. There's a story called by Tobias Wolff called "Bullet in the Brain." I don't know if it was in the New Yorker a million years ago. One of the features of it, and it happens very early in the story, you can find this if you Google it, but is that there's a bank robbery and the main character gets shot. And instead of just kind of like boom down, which is what happens in like Tim O'Brien's story, right? He's very focused in the things they carried on a particular soldier getting killed in Vietnam, and that one of the characters says, like Ted Lavender, he just went boom down, and the shot and falls, right? In Bullet in the Brain, the moment that the bullet kind of breaches the character's head, it slows down, and it talks about like the epithelial layers and the bone and the tissues that the bullet is slowly passing through, and then it pauses to kind of go back into that character's mind at that moment. Like, what are they thinking about in like the fraction of a second that it takes for this bullet to eventually end the man's life, right? Like, and it turns out like the specific memory that he brings up is a surprising one, because he's been kind of a jerk before, and then the memory kind of like makes him human again, right? But it happens in that tiny fraction of a second. Even though he's still surrounded by the bank, kind of the atmosphere of the memory transports him to another place, and it becomes kind of a blessing to him, I think, in his last moment. So how fast time goes is also an element of setting. Inventory, physical items in a room or a space or an outdoor area. So tools or appliances that somebody has, keepsakes or pictures. Pictures are always backstory, or the opportunity for backstory. For wedding pictures, or like whether the wedding picture is torn so that one person's pulled out, right? There's a story there in that physical item. Trash, things that people throw away, right? I mean, any kind of like, detective story, right? They're gonna, not always, but often they'll kind of go through the trash of the suspect to see, like, ooh, what have they thrown out? And all kinds of things like that people surround themselves with, or that people try to keep away from themselves, can be revealing, and that is an element of setting, an element of the physicality of whatever surrounds them. When we're thinking about place, I like to think of it as kind of like concentric circles, with the first circle being like as big as you can imagine, bigger than you can imagine. That might encompass like the galaxy or a planet or a continent or a country or whatever the largest container is for whatever your setting is, because that will influence. If you notice the beginning of the Star Wars movies, right? It says like in a galaxy far away, long ago, right? Like this, it's basically saying not here and not now. And so we can kind of, the idea is like let go of whatever you think you know about your own history. Because we're supplanting a different history in a different background, a different context for whatever story you're about to engage with. A place can be more specific, like a state or a city or a town, a slightly smaller container, but also one that's significant. If something happens in Texas, it might read differently on a local or a national scale than if something happens in Wyoming or something happens in Massachusetts or something like that, for example. Of course, another smaller circle is whatever's kind of walkable or accessible or visible to whatever area that characters are interacting with. So like here we have like, I can see the kitchen in the background, I can see the door to the outside, I can see the arboretum on the other side, right? So all of these things are encompassed in the setting because they're kind of whatever is perceivable by whoever is reporting on it. And then the immediate, right? So that can be like, it can be the space of somebody's body or multiple bodies, or it can be the room or whatever the kind of immediate feeling of the interior of a car, right? But it's usually a smaller physical setting. Okay, so in terms of cultural cues, we touched on this a little bit, but somebody's clothes, right? Like if we're on the college campus, you kind of can be aware that you're on the campus, even if you just pay attention to the way people are dressing, right? And especially like to trends. Anybody who spends a lot of time on campus will be like, oh, like there are the neon sneakers that are really popular this year, or the flowered backpacks, or like the giant t-shirts and like the workout shorts or whatever it is. There's these kind of like trends that run through, and that will tell you where you are. Which is a lot different than like being at the gym or being, you know, at a wedding or something. People's mannerisms, right? Like if you're in Italy, people are going to kiss you on both cheeks, and if you're here and somebody tries to kiss you on both cheeks, and it's like, I have a defensive posture or something, you know, like distance, I don't know. Hairstyles, right? Will tell you a lot about where you are, what's normal. Accents or diction can, you know, word choice things will inform you about the region wherever you are. And then what's normal to do. People's hobbies or activities, right? Going fishing or hunting might be completely normal for one area, but like, you know, if I'm living in Brooklyn, right, and I'm like, oh, we're hunting this weekend, like somebody might look at me like, what? And how, you're gonna drive there or fly? Or like, how are you gonna get to like a place where there's animals, you know, like that you're allowed, like that's not a zoo. Versus here, like you can just, you know, there's lots of places in reach that you can get to pretty easily, and it would be normal for you to have the equipment for that, right? So variations from an expectation. If I say to you, I'm going to go shopping, I'm going to go to Market Street or something, right? Then you have an idea of what Market Street looks like, what the shelves look like, what the, you know, the sound piped in overhead. If you walk into Market Street and the shelves are empty, immediately something's wrong. Immediately there's tension, immediately there's conflict, there's backstory there, right? Or if you go in there and it's just chaos, that people are like racing up and down the aisles, right? Something's different. Or if you walk in there and somebody's like, oh, let me take your jacket and hang it up for you, and you know, here's your card and your personal shopper, right? Like that's a different universe that needs some explanation, right? So if we assume store, but there's something different about it, then we know that the setting is involved somehow in whatever story is about to be told. Again, oh, we're going to the playground, great, we have an idea what the playground looks like, but if we go to the playground and everything's kind of like broken glass and like the slide is in disrepair, right, there's a story there. So if it undercuts our expectations or if it shifts our expectations, then immediately story is a possibility. Or if we're driving someplace, but there's like a storm, it can immediately change the physical location. The physical location can have an effect on whatever has happened. So these are just some things that I think setting can do to influence and to intensify plots and interactions between characters. So you may or may not have a piece of paper or pencil, but I did embed a couple of potential writing exercises that are just like personal and optional. If you have your phone, you also have a notes app. So if you choose to engage in these, then go ahead. And if not, I'm happy to send this presentation to Linda, or and she can distribute it if you want to try these on your own time. But just a few different things that you can try or kind of let's see, test yourself, just sort of play around with in terms of describing settings. So my suggestion to you, if you wanted to engage with this, is that you choose one of these kind of place containers. These are general place containers that you might know very well, like something that you've engaged with a lot. You kind of can easily bring up all of the sensory and the physical attributes of that place, and that you might describe it in like 3 to 5 sentences as if it were kind of like the opening shot or the establishing shot of a story that takes place there. And then, if you might choose one of these locations where you've never been before, where your only idea about it comes from books or comes from movies or comes from other people's descriptions, and try that same thing. Try to describe it as if it were the opening shot for a story that you were going to set there. And thinking about which one's easier, which one you have access to, which one feels more sort of like fruitful or exciting or like has more heat to it. So I don't know how easy it is to read all of these from the back, so I'm going to just briefly go through all of them. So my first category here is just like kind of general geography, right? Like some potential places you could choose from: the Atlantic Ocean, the English moors, the Saharan desert, the Brazilian rainforest, Australian outback, the Rocky Mountains, or any kind of major U.S. or foreign city. right? That's kind of the general container. If we think about our concentric circles, or a city maybe that you know well or that you've never been to but you have an idea about. So San Francisco or Kyoto or Nairobi, Mexico City, Beijing, Paris or Rio de Janeiro, all of these kind of places where you may have been or may have never been, may have wanted to go or may have never wanted to go. A type of building, hotel, restaurant, office, school, bus station, hospital, or store. Those places that you may have probably been once or twice, sometimes against your will. Specific room space, locker room, cabin on a cruise ship, hot air balloon basket, international space station, roller coaster, submarine, the Grand Canyon. Right? These are, you may have potentially been on some of those once or maybe more than once. Or a cultural or sporting event, so like a boxing match or a ballet performance, Easter egg hunt, the running of the bulls at Olympic Games, Mardi Gras, or the Kentucky Derby. So I have one sort of small example of a kind of establishing shot from the beginning of a novel. I don't know if anyone has read Lainey Paul's The Bees. She's a UK author, I think, and it's a novel about bees, like it says. So she starts the novel this way. The old orchard stood besieged. To one side spread a vast arable plain, a dullard's patchwork of corn and soy reaching to the dark tree line of the hills. To the other, a light industrial development stretched toward the town. So it's maybe, it's a vision of a setting, right? A kind of bifurcated setting. So to one side and then to the other side. But does anybody have any sense of any kind of either conflict or plot element that might arise just from that description of the physical place?
The long-term industrial developments are clearly an expanding images.
Yeah.
Probably not going to fare well for an orchard.
Yeah, absolutely. The orchard is besieged, and it's not besieged probably, although it might be a little bit by this kind of like cultivated agriculture, but it's more endangered from this kind of like industrial development that is like seeping toward it, right? So there's kind of like anxiety, at least for me, about like this orchard is maybe kind of in some kind of peril, right? It's not going to survive, or it's not going to survive in the way that it has before if these two kind of forces keep kind of trying to squeeze it out, right? Yeah, anything else? Any other thoughts? Yeah.
Just that one word, besiege.
Yeah.
If they changed that word, it would completely give or if it stood in some way proudly.
Yeah. Yeah. Like if the old orchard was embraced.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
By, it's protected by the agriculture and the development. Nobody knows about it. It's back here, but it's not protected, right?
Or hidden or something like that.
Absolutely.
It's like, that one sentence gives you enough impetus and curiosity to read the next two sentences.
Yes, absolutely. Besiege naturally has this idea of aggression associated with it, right? There's an enemy somewhere. Yeah.
The word dullards, patchwork. It means somebody who owns the corn and soy, probably also owns the orchard, and they're very smart. They're going to let this happen.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something about the word dullard that suggests like maybe kind of like plodding or like monotonous or like this kind of like order, like right, yeah. And if you think about if the orchard is cultivated and planted, that's one thing which you don't necessarily know if it's kind of natural and it's like evolved on its own. Like there could be like a nature versus nurture thing going on here, right? Like somebody's trying to like wrest nature into an orderly way, trying to make it make sense, right? Like that quote we heard earlier, that versus like what nature can be wild and can have its own kind of rhythms and its own kind of impetus without somebody trying to control it. So it could be like that too. Yeah. So either it's somebody's unintelligent who's maybe responsible for this orchard and that doesn't bode well, or it could be somebody who's sort of like boring, right? And this kind of like I'm gonna make money off of this patch of land and at whatever cost to the orchard. Maybe the soy brings in more money than the apples do. Yeah. So if you like, you can did anybody do the exercise? Does anybody want to share it if they did? It's totally optional. Okay, you can decide not to share. We can return to the end too. There'll be a couple more opportunities. So, but I think it's interesting. If anybody does want to share, it'll be interesting to see if we can determine, is this the place that this person knows well, or is this a place that somebody's sort of constructing based on assumptions about this place, right? Because everybody, there's an expert on everything out there. So you try to publish on, like some specific variety of like camembert cheese or something, and you think you can get away with, not knowing everything about it. But somebody out there is an expert in camembert cheese, and they're going to, call you out if you get it wrong. Which is not to say that you have to get it right, especially if you're writing fiction, right? Like there's some wiggle room there, but sometimes it feels like there's pressure because of the experts. Okay, so I'm thinking about how to make the most of a place in fiction, whether that place is Lubbock or whether that place is somewhere else you're trying to immerse yourself in, or whether that place is not Texas Tech or something like that. What does it mean to think of setting as a character? Right, so we talked a little bit about this with that There Will Come Soft Rain story, right, where the house is kind of a character, but mostly because it kind of presents, it represents the opposite of people, right, the people who made it are gone, and the house is sort of about to die too. So these are sort of some strategic uses for setting in fiction. Most commonly, of course, we use setting to think about grounding us in time and place, again, whether those times and places are real and actual, or whether they're imagined, fantastic, science fiction. I just got finished reading The Left Hand of Darkness, that Ursula K. Le Guin novel. I don't know if anyone's read that recently, but there's all kinds of like dates. There's like one part of it is letters, I think there's journal sections that are kind of involved, and it always gives like the date, and it's like Star Trek or Starship, right? And then it's the captain's log, but it still locates us in a particular time and place, even if it's not ours. So one use is that setting can establish narrative tone, hint at genre, right? We talked about this already, right? Set the mood. We kind of already know from that like bees section that there's trouble brewing, right? Something's going to happen, and things are going to change. They can't stay the way they are because of these other forces that are encroaching. Setting can contextualize situations of ongoing conflict. So you know that when you enter into fiction, usually there's some trouble that's going on already. And then there's also some kind of inciting incident that sets off a new trouble, right? So I tend to think of that first trouble that's ongoing as like the chronic conflict. And then the setting, or the part that kicks off the new story is the acute trouble, right? And so those two things can kind of come into realization by the way that a setting is described. I have examples for all of these, so I'll just kind of won't belabor them here. Setting can be used to show character attitude, voice, and perspective. So I talked just a little bit about that with perspective in terms of what a character might describe versus what they see, where they're positioned in a particular place. But of course, it can also tell us how they feel about it. Setting can reveal relationships between characters or change, so that those relationships are changing or should change or might change in the imminent future. And setting can let the world challenge characters or force decision making, right? So if there's, I guess a very basic example, like the movie Twister, right? Like if there's a character who's in their house and there's a tornado, I always forget, it's Morning or Watch, right? So there's a tornado warning, is that the one that doesn't have a real tornado but the conditions exist, or is that one? That's Watch, okay. I'm gonna get it right some of these days. I'm not did not grow up in a tornado zone, but okay, so there's a tornado watch, right? So there's a particular character who's gonna like, at that last month, is gonna like collect all their children and like drive 2 hours south to the grandparents' house and just kind of wait that out. And there's somebody who's gonna wait until the very last moment where they see it coming toward them and try to take a picture of it before they get into the shelter, right? But the tornado approaching will force a character to make a decision about how to react to it, right? Whether that's to behave recklessly or to behave like overly cautiously, but either way they're going to have to choose, and those choices are what make plot and what make fiction, right? Okay, so thinking about establishing a narrative tone or hinting at genre, this is the beginning to The Haunting of Hill House, which is a book by Shirley Jackson, also been made into a movie. So just, tell me what you get from this paragraph. No live organism can continue for long to exist sanely under conditions of absolute reality. Even larks and katydids are supposed by some to dream. Hill House, not sane, stood by itself against its hills, holding darkness within. It had stood so for 80 years and might stand for 80 more. Within, walls continued upright, bricks met neatly, floors were firm, and doors were sensibly shut. Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House, and whatever walked there, walked alone. Why do we get that feeling from what we've heard there? Haunting. Okay, yeah, absolutely. So that kind of word, just even in the title, is kind of overshadowing. It sets our expectations for what we're going to. And there's a setting in the title, right? Hill House is a specific place. It's not just like Billy's house down the street, and it's not the White House, right? It's Hill House, and it takes on the connotations of that word haunting. Absolutely.
You use the word saying twice in the first two sentences. Somebody's going nuts in this.
Yeah, absolutely. Somebody probably will. The house already is insane, right? So this idea of like a place like having this kind of presence and maybe being able to confer it like it's contagious, right? That sets up some anxiety to begin with, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Hidden secrets that are best not being discovered. The idea of a house, too, and this is not necessarily Hill House, this is just a house, a picture that I associated with it, but if you think of a house as it has a door that can be locked, right? It has windows that can be closed. It's kind of self-contained. And there's that idea of like you kind of don't necessarily know what's going on behind your neighbor's doors, right? And sometimes like it's fine, just mind your own business and nothing. But if this is a house that's contagious, right, that has some kind of like evil associated with it or present in it, right, then that presents a danger to anybody that might interact with it, right? So it sets up the tone. Whatever's going to happen later, we're kind of already prepped, right? We're watching with our kind of our hands almost over our eyes.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
I took a poetry class in college, and I wrote one of the professors about was your punctuation is relentless. And obviously that's stayed with me forever.
Mm-hmm.
The punctuation seems relentless.
Yeah.
And what is it that breaking up of the sentences with all of this punctuation and short little things that kind of makes this feel creepy or like there's something more to discover?
I think that's really, I think that's really astute. I think that part of what's happening here is that the whole story is not being told. Like it does keep kind of stopping itself, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's sort of, and it could tell the whole story. It could say like, Hill House is haunted and some bad stuff went down there, right? It doesn't do that up front, right? It draws it out. It's like, there's suspense just in the way that those semicolons, right? And those periods and commas are being used. It's deliberate, those choices, absolutely. Yeah, Linda.
Yes, I noticed the diction choice of some specific words that you said that darkness, silence, so that just equals.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely, and the repetition too. But yeah, it's like these words that are chosen for their kind of unsettling nature, and that's also deliberate to set up the tone, right? Yeah, absolutely. This is and this is not the kind of thing that happens probably on the first try. This is something that's cultivated, right? Like how can I make this creepier, right? I can imagine her thinking that.
The first time she said, shit went down at this place.
that would be a whole different kind of story. Yeah, absolutely.
Use of the element, the insect's ring gives it some real kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of like letting other organisms have consciousness, right? Like that's like immediately we're in a kind of a slightly different alternative universe than the one that we think we might live in now, right? Like this is one where everything has potential to be dangerous to us. Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. So you'll be familiar with artist Hemingway's work. I don't know if you've read this short story by him. It's very frequently used in creative writing classes to exemplify subtext, right? That there's something going on the surface and then there's something completely different going on that's not being addressed. So I don't know if you can tell just from this description of setting what the conflict is or whether there is, but let's read it out loud and see if you can detect any kind of trouble brewing. So the hills across the valley of the Ebro were long and white. On this side, there was no shade and no trees, and the station was between two lines of rails in the sun. Close against the side of the station, there was the warm shadow of the building and a curtain made of strings of bamboo beads hung across the open door into the bar to keep out flies. The American and the girl with him sat at a table in the shade outside the building. It was very hot, and the express from Barcelona would come in 40 minutes. It stopped at this junction for 2 minutes and went to Madrid. So the situation is that these two people are sitting at a train station with nothing around them. They're waiting for a train to go to an actual place, but they're between Madrid and Barcelona. So any tensions, anything come up for you, anything that you're worried about for them? Yeah, something's going to happen. And if we're setting the story now, 2 minutes before the train comes, then there's a timer that's ticking down immediately. And so that goes back to that first element of setting that we're talking about, the time, right? The pace. This story is going to be kind of short, and it is kind of short. It's like 3 pages. And everything that's going to be exchanged to them is going to happen in that 2 minutes. So that timer starts going off. Like, whatever's going to happen is going to happen fast. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Why are they outside?
Why are they outside when it's hot? Yeah, why are they choosing to be in this least comfortable location instead of being inside where they can have a drink, you can kind of relax, right? Yeah.
The topography, no tree, no nothing, shielded houses.
Yeah, the topography, they're kind of like in the sun, there's like this unforgiving landscape, there's no trees, right? So it's like it's a little bit hellish, maybe. Right? I mean, they're kind of like sitting and sweating and hot and uncomfortable, and they're choosing it too, right? So there's discomfort that's just oozing out from the setting that they're immersed in.
I think around before I heard about said, I think immersion, exploration, since they came out.
Oh, interesting. Or yeah, that they're running from something, whether or not it's the law, right? This idea that these two people are kind of like illicitly, well, first of all, we don't know their names, right? So the American and the girl is kind of like incognito a little bit, right? And so maybe they're kind of like, you know, they don't want to be in the public eye. They don't want to be in the bar where like the bartender could remember them or something, right? Like maybe there's something criminal or something illicit going on between them.
Is there an influence here that relates with the bamboo curtain or keeping flies out and then coming in, which may be an influence that's annoying or unwelcome in the bar?
That's totally possible, that they don't feel welcome in the bar for whatever. First of all, they're in Spain, and there's an American there, right? So there's like an automatic like foreigner, right? So they're like almost being kept out by that curtain too, right? They're not invited into the space of the place where they're in. And that, I mean, we can kind of extend that maybe even to like the society beyond the bar, but like they, you know, what are they doing here? They're kind of foreign bodies in this place that may or may not want to absorb them. So one of the things that these characters end up talking about, without talking about it at all, is the notion that this couple who is not married, this girl, she is younger than him. She's a girl, right? He said that's what the American versus the girl, absolutely. And she also, in this situation, what they're talking about is that she has an unwanted pregnancy. And so he wants her to do one thing, she wants to do another thing. And that is, you can read the story to find out the rest of that. But that is what's happening. So they are stuck in a place with Barcelona on one side and Madrid on the other, right? They're in limbo, literally, in their conversation and also in their physical location, right? And so that kind of moving between 2 points and having that discussion and not being on the same page is kind of being echoed. Even if we don't know it right now, that's what develops. So the feeling of that being in between and not agreeing with each other is being conveyed just by the physical place that they're in. So show character, attitude, voice, and perspective. So tell me what you think about this character and her situation. This is the opening to a story called Mrs. Duta Writes a Letter by Chiba Karuni. Who teaches at Houston too, I think. When the alarm goes off at 5 a.m., buzzing like a trapped wasp, Mrs. Duta has been lying awake for quite a while. She still has difficulty sleeping on the Permarest mattress that Sagar and Shyamali, her son and daughter-in-law, have bought specially for her, though she has had it now for 2 months. It is too American, soft, unlike the reassuringly solid Cobra ticking she used at home. But this is home now, she reminds herself. She reaches hurriedly to turn off the alarm, but in the dark, her fingers get confused among the knobs, and the electric clock falls with a thud to the floor. Its angry metallic call vibrates through the walls of her room, and she is sure it will wake everyone. How does this person feel about where she is?
This is negative vibes.
Negative vibes.
Angry, unhappy vibes.
Yeah.
There's a relationship in this about the bed is how she relates to her environment, and then the alarm clock is how people relate to her.
Yeah, absolutely. So she feels, somebody bought this bed thinking, you're going to love it, right? And they were wrong because she likes a different kind of bed. And the alarm clock, so there's kind of like a two worlds going on here thing. Like, this is too soft. I'm used to my harder bed, right? Like, so she doesn't complain about that. But she maybe hasn't complained about it out loud because it's still, the situation is still existing. She still had to use this mattress somebody bought for her, but she might feel guilty that they bought it for her, so she has to use it even though she's not comfortable, right? Versus the alarm clock, right? This technology is kind of, sort of attacking her in the morning, right? She wants to wake up, but she doesn't want to wake up this way with this device, but this is a device that's been provided to her, right? So there's kind of like a way that she normally wakes up, and this is not it, right? But she's trying to like fit herself like a round peg in a square hole, right? And everything is not quite comfortable, not quite right. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
Well, I think the alarm clock started her day off wrong when it called.
Yeah, absolutely. This is starting the day off wrong, and it suggests that maybe this is kind of the way it always goes in the morning, which, again, right? Like, I can never get this right. Like, the idea that it's going to wake everyone, like, maybe it's woken people before, right? That she's having to struggle with this day after day.
Started out wrong.
Actually.
Negative sense.
We're on the wrong foot to begin with. Yeah, absolutely. It's the alarm.
So then the negative thoughts just continued to spiral.
Yeah, absolutely. One thought leads to another. Yeah, and normally, this is, if you take a creative writing class, people will tell you, do not start with the alarm going off because it's too commonplace, right? Don't wake up, because everybody wakes up. Don't go brush your teeth. Everybody brushes their teeth. The only exception to that is if something doesn't go according to plan. Right? If you can't easily shut the alarm clock and hop out of bed, like, this gives us information that this alarm clock something is wrong in this space, wrong with this character's mind and the way that she feels about where she is. Yeah.
The cultural inference here is that the setting is this young, I would assume, Indian lady is American, or an American environment.
Yes.
She's adjusting to.
Yes, this is absolutely exactly right. So she talks about her son and daughter-in-law kind of bringing her here, and she has a Cobra mattress at home, whatever that. I'm not totally familiar with that kind of mattress, but she is, right? That's what she prefers in India, where she's from, right? And her name, this is Duta writes a letter, right? So we kind of have this setting that absolutely, this is somebody trying to like assimilate to an American way of life, an American way of being after having been in India. And that's kind of baked into the setting here based on what doesn't fit with what feels normal to her. And she's done a routine like her whole life, waking up in India in a certain way, in a certain place, and now she's kind of set in those ways, right? Except for she doesn't get to do those ways anymore. So she just doesn't she's not comfortable here, right? Yeah.
It's out of her
What else
comfort
stood
zone.
out to me was, where it said, but this is home now. She reminded us.
Yeah, she's thinking of India as home, but this is home now.
Yeah, that really struck me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, yeah. She's
Yeah.
not in a good space, but she's not in a good space because this is her home, but she's having to make it.
Exactly. She's kind of stranded here, right? Like, it might as well be a desert island. She's trying to figure out how to live and how to survive in this place that is not her normal situation. That word "but" is doing a lot of work there, right? That she thinks about home like, but this is home now, right? Like, now she remembers, like, I've got to make it work because this is my new situation, whether I like it or not, right? So she's there kind of against her will, it seems like, maybe. If she had her will, she might be somewhere else, right? Yeah.
Trap laws.
She's a trap boss. It's right there. That physical inventory, and again, it's not actually there, it's there in her mind, and it's there, the sound is projecting it to her, right? So she is definitely kind of showing us how she feels and kind of identifying with the idea of trap loss, right? Yeah, and that's coming out at us through the setting and through the senses that she's using to perceive the setting. Okay, so we have the opening to a short story called Shiloh by Bobby Ann Mason. I think she's the person who, her work kicked off a genre that's known as Kmart fiction, which is kind of funny because Kmart doesn't really exist anymore, although people here might recognize that word, right? But that's what people, that's the kind of genre, I guess, that people associate her writing with. But this is the opening to this short story. Actually, it's not the first paragraph, but it's in like the first page or two.
The Blue Light Specials?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was definitely a thing. I mean, it's like, you know, it was a Walmart. It was like a, yeah, familiar kind of, yeah. That's where the YMCA, right? Isn't it? Yeah, so, yeah. R.I.P. Kmart. Okay, so now that Leroy has come home to stay, he notices how much the town has changed. Subdivisions are spreading across western Kentucky like an oil slick. The sign at the edge of town says, Pop 11,500. Only 700 more than it said 20 years before. Leroy can't figure out who is living in all the new houses. The farmers who used to gather around the courthouse square on Saturday afternoons to play checkers and spit tobacco juice have gone. It's been years since Leroy thought about the farmers, and they have disappeared without his noticing. Okay. So what kind of, this idea of revealing relationships or change, so yeah, what kind of impressions do you get from this description of this location somewhere in Kentucky, western Kentucky?
He's disconnected now.
Yeah, he's been gone, now he's back, and the world has changed out from under him. Yeah.
He's not in favor of the change. He compares the subdivisions to the roads.
Yeah.
It's not a favor, it's not like monsters.
Yeah. Right, yeah, but it was like the subdivisions are popping up like daisies, right? Like that's a very different description of, you know, a kind of welcoming, like, wow, we're joining the rest of the world. Yeah.
I think there is an element of surprise here because he sees the population side, I mean, it's not that much more than it was.
Yeah, where have all my friends gone? Where have my people gone? Where's my place, right? Like I used to live here. I mean, it's a different, so Mrs. Duton, the previous, has never been here before and just trying to fit herself in, right? This is his home, but it doesn't feel like home anymore, right? Because it's changed, because people have like switched out somehow. The farmers are gone and there's like people who want to live in subdivisions or buying homes in these neighborhoods that are, you know, befouling the landscape, right? Like that's a kind of dismay at the world moving the direction that somebody doesn't want to be taken in, right? And so we can kind of see how he wants the landscape to be, how it's changing outside. There's conflict embedded in that, in his opinion about that, right? This story, he's a long-range trucker who has kind of retired based on because of an injury, and so he's had to come home. And he's been other places, but he's always had this nice safe place to land, but now it's not a safe place anymore, now that he's there to act with enough time on his hands to actually interact with it, right? And to say, oh wait, this is not the place I remember. Surprisingly, or not surprisingly in the story, his marriage is also shifting and changing, right? So the way that his marriage goes is kind of mirroring this, like, wait, this isn't the marriage I remember. Like, we used to be, you know, we had all these memories, we had all these, you know, things in common, but now, all of a sudden, his wife is lifting weights and, you know, like, improving herself and going to college and doing all these things that she had never expressed interest in before, right? So even as the place is changing, his wife is changing, and then his emotional home as well as his physical home are both kind of moving without his permission to other places. This is my last example. So of setting, kind of influencing the plot, the characters, and the way that the story might go. So this is from Jane Eyre. This is an oldie but a goodie. It starts this way. This is the opening of the whole novel. There was no possibility of taking a walk that day. We had been wandering, indeed, in the leafless shrubbery an hour in the morning, but since dinner, Mrs. Reed, when there was no company, dined early. The cold winter wind had brought with it clouds so somber and a rain so penetrating that further outdoor exercise was now out of the question. I was glad of it. I never liked long walks, especially on chilly afternoons. Dreadful to me was the coming home in the raw twilight with the nurse, and humbled by the consciousness of my physical inferiority to Eliza, John, and Georgiana Reed. Impressions?
I am blown away by these examples, and I'm sure those are some reasons why you brought this example. How much we are finding out about what we are fixing to experience in such a short time, and in so few words. I know so much about so much.
Yeah. Yeah, and just in terms of the character's mindset, right? Like she's kind of like unsettled, but on the other hand, she doesn't have to walk today. Like, yay, no walk in the cold, chilly English countryside. Like, thank goodness. Again, another character might be like, oh man, I love these days. Like, no sun on me, like I get moisturized, like what's not to like, right? But that's not how this character feels about it. She doesn't want to go out there. She doesn't have to, because she's not reminded of how, what she says, physically inferior she is to this kind of unit, Eliza, John, and Georgiana Reed, that she's obviously been compared to unfavorably for a long time, right? So there's this other reminder about how much of a problem she is, how much of a burden she is, how weak she is compared to them. That won't be a factor for this afternoon. Yeah. Did you read it?
You know, I'm really getting the sense that she's has a problem with her self-esteem. But I'm not sure that is relative to how she feels about the English shrubbery and the setting. Maybe it has some connection to her practices.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not like she's imagining this place where she gets to hold out, like, where she gets to hide out from the rain as like a haven necessarily, right? Like she doesn't necessarily love her surroundings anyway. It's not like, you know, she's like, finally we get to like hang out in the cozy living room, right? It's, I mean, yeah, it sounds, and this character, if you read this book, isn't given any reasons to love herself in this moment, right? She's a charity child, as she kind of thinks about herself, that her parents have died, she's been taken in by relatives reluctantly, like the other kids get to go away to school, she doesn't, and she's kind of, and also one of these kids, John, Reed, like beats up on her all the time, and she gets blamed for it, right? So she doesn't feel comfortable inside or out, right? And you kind of get that impression, I think, by the way that she sees everything. She sees everything in this kind of like gray, like leafless, you know, like lack of vibrancy, including herself, because that's exactly how she's been made to feel it, right? Yeah.
She calls her Mrs. Reed instead of her aunt.
Oh yeah, yeah. Absolutely. She's not part of that unit, she's not part of that family, and she's being made aware of it constantly, right? Yeah, Mrs. Reed, absolutely. Yeah, so again, this decision has been, this is about the sort of, you know, how characters react to adversity. Her decision is basically taken out of her hands, like, thank goodness I don't have to go on this walk, right? And she's glad for that. What she does in the next paragraph is get a book and hide out her window seat and read it, and that's what gets her in trouble, because John finds her alone there and beats her up, and then she gets sent to her room, because that is the kind of house that she lives in, right? But she gets this little bit of respite from the rain, this little bit of respite in a book, and then that's all taken from her too, right? But her choice is to kind of hide out even further when she gets this chance to shelter herself from the rain and the outside and the family, right? And you kind of get that impression that I think that she's not comfortable anywhere, because there's no place of comfort for her. And so the course of the book is kind of about her finding her place. Where's her place going to be? And also finding her worth, somebody who's going to value her. This is another exercise, writing exercise. You don't have to do it. It's totally optional, or you could do it later. My invitation to you is that you think about how somebody's circumstances, how their history, how the choices that they've made, how the person they've become might influence the way that they would describe or interact with a particular setting, right? So not every kind of person is going to see every kind of situation through the same set of eyes.
I honestly thought you were going to give us a small break in the last writing exercise.
Yeah? Oh, I will, if you want me to.
I did one.
Oh, yeah.
But I didn't know if I can continue with this.
I'm happy to. Yeah, why don't we stop and have an example from exercise 1. And if you want to take a look at exercise 2 too, then that's great, and I will read that after we get this. But yeah, let's hear those two different, remember that was to choose two different places, one you're familiar with, one you're not as familiar with, and to give us that sort of establishing shot. You can give us either one to begin with.
One place that you're familiar with,
That's fine. No, give it us. There's no wrong. There's no way to do it wrong.
there's
Yeah.
huge giant, sweat running down from behind the door, salt is back on there. The disgusting acidity of human stench fills my nose with unwashed masses pressing apart. The filth of the bank out, getting long as I make my way to where the world was.
Read that last line again. Was that wonderful?
The filth of the bank out and kick along as I make my way to where the world was.
Ooh, I love that. That's so interesting in the way that we kind of get initially a setting that seems like it could be familiar, it could be, you know, a world that we recognize, right? Where, I mean, I've never been to Beijing, but I know that a lot of people live there, right? So the idea of like being pressed upon by the masses, right? It seems like that could be pretty authentic. The fedora, that's interesting. Like, any associations with the fedora immediately that come to mind? Not from Beijing. So somebody foreign to the situation?
It definitely gave me an image of a character that perhaps was a little smooth, a little sophisticated.
Streetwise, yeah, absolutely, yeah, not from Beijing. I don't know, I guess it could be female, but I associate fedora specifically with male. For, you know, again, it can undercut my expectations in any way, but I'm getting kind of an image up front. Yeah, the Indiana Jones, right? Well, somebody on a mission, it seems like, right? Somebody who's got some kind of like, maybe a secretive mission because he's in a back alley, right? Which is a lot different than like, oh, we're going off to see the, you know, the next tourist site with my group, and everybody's got like their, you know, red balloons or whatever it is that we're following, and we're sticking out like sore thumb from the side. It's not like that. Like he's kind of, he might not be from there, but he knows where he's going, he knows what he's doing, and then he's going to see where the Oracle held a report, right? So there's like, all of a sudden, it thrusts us into this other kind of experience of being in this place. And maybe it's a world that kind of parallels the world that we're in, and just not everybody knows about it. Or maybe we're in an entirely different universe where there are different laws of physics, where there are different you know, ways of behaving that we're going to learn about. But either way, we learn up front that there's something we have to pay attention to. Yeah, that's a really great example. I love that. Thank you. That's awesome. Okay, so this one, should you choose to do it now or later? If you were born between January and March, then you write the persona of a 5-year-old child. If you were born between April and June, then you write the persona of a pregnant person. If you were born in July through September, you write from the perspective of a professional athlete. And if you were born between October and December, you would write with the perspective of a person who's in a wheelchair or who uses some kind of other accessibility device. Now, what setting you're describing? If your last name is between A and G, describe a set of rickety stairs through this person's perspective. If your last name is between H and M, describe a swimming pool in somebody's mind that fits into this category. If your last name is between N or R, describe a hospital room. Again, any of these can have positive or negative connotations, and depending on that person's history. Not every 5-year-old is the same as every other 5-year-old, right? And if your last name is between S and Z, describe a 5-star restaurant in one of these people's perspectives. And again, you don't have to do a huge long explanation necessarily, but if you just even get a couple lines of what this place might look like to this person or feel like to this person on immersion, I'll give you just maybe 2 minutes if you want, and for those of you who want to, experiment with it. We'll see if anybody wants to share before we move on. 30 seconds more. You don't have to finish a full paragraph. Does anybody want to share a line or two? No pressure. Yeah, go for it. And you don't tell us who you were writing as or what you were describing. Just give us a description. We'll see if we can guess.
Well, it's going to be pretty obvious.
That's totally fine.
Okay, the young diver hovered over the board, shivering in the reflection of the deck's lawn.
All right. Yeah. Awesome. Well, that works out. If it's a professional athlete who's potentially a diver hovering over a swimming pool, then that's a very familiar setting to them, right? Of course, if it's, I don't know, a professional curler, right, hovering over a swimming pool, then that might be, yeah, absolutely. Then that would be a little more, especially just how high the diving board is, right? Like some of the, I don't know if anyone's seen like a TikTok or a YouTube or somebody going off the high dive, right? Sometimes they have those GoPro cameras. It's a little disconcerting, yeah.
Pushing up to the exclusive place said, I love how this way, pushing left is my shirt, and raised the gold that will kept around my neck. It's no longer back.
Ooh, there we go. So we have a professional athlete in a 5-star restaurant, so it sounds like to me. But that's, and for somebody, that might be like, ooh, I'm about to indulge, I'm about to have the meal of my lifetime, right? But for somebody who has had to count calories and who has had a very like specific and maybe damaging relationship with food because they have to keep their body in a certain shape that presented with that temptation or even kind of like overindulgence, that might be sickening. Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good piece of somebody's history and sort of goals, right, clashing with the physical place that they find themselves. Yeah, awesome.
Such a cool that thing of the thumb between the buttons and the gold medal under the shirt. It's like, is there hiding who they really are? They've got clothes always, but not
Outside the shirt.
But I know that was so vivid. I could see that. And feel that.
Yeah, and there's a whole story just in that. That's a physical inventory item, right? That's an aspect of setting that they're carrying the medal around every day deliberately, but underneath, right? Just to kind of remind. We don't know how long ago they earned it, right? And how long it's been this kind of constant companion, and what exactly it means to them, right? Because it might mean something to, you know, someone buys with another medal, like, well, maybe she just throws it on the pile, you know? But if somebody's been like working, you know, 15 years and everyone's been saying you're too old to compete, and then they win a medal, that's maybe it's a different feeling, right? So yeah, absolutely. Really cool contrast there of the character and the place they end up. Again, we can come back and share these, so I want to make sure to, I don't have very many slides yet, and there's one more exercise if we get there. One of the downfalls potentially of setting in a story, right, is that you gotta go on. I talked about Charles Dickens or, you know, so ways to avoid having these large, like, dropped-in chunks of description are to embed the setting in the action and in the dialogue. So these are some ways to do that, to avoid long description paragraphs, or descriptive paragraphs. So one is, yeah, like I said, you can have characters reveal setting in the action. So they can sink into that soft couch where the springs are all worn out, or they can scuff the pristine floor and make a mark and feel awkward about that, right? And that's a way to know, like, oh, this is a really clean, well-maintained place and I just messed it up. That's conflict again. That's just based on how this character's interacting with the place where they find themselves. You can describe setting through varying expertise. So if I open the hood to my car, it's going to look kind of greasy and dirty and squiggly and like inscrutable to me because I don't know what goes where or what might be wrong if the car broke down. But if I'm a mechanic, I'm going to open it up and be like, oh man, my carburetor's cracked or whatever it is, right? Or like, oh, there's my, you know, radiator smoking, it must need some water. So depending on my level of expertise, what I see is going to look different to me, right? Or to your character. So depending on how familiar they are with what they're looking at, they see it differently. You can embed descriptions in dialogue. So maybe there's one character who's giving directions to another character. There used to be an old commercial for Poland Springs Water where I grew up, which is based in Maine. And like everybody, it was like somebody driving, like a tourist driving their car being like, where's Poland Springs? And then kind of an old timer on the porch saying, oh, you can't get there from here. And that's how they would say it, right? And so like, well, of course you can get anywhere from anywhere, right? Like you have MapQuest or whatever it was back then, like, you know, you can get there, but they don't want you getting there, right? And so giving directions or refusing to give directions, right? You can embed the kind of place you are, then there's cultural cues in that as well. You can also sort of name the inventory, look at the things in the place. People can comment on them. Like, oh, where'd you get this metal? You know, how it's kind of tarnished. You know, why don't you wear it under your shirt every day, right? You can step up the sensory details. So we've talked about this a little bit, but you can tell us that we're in a kitchen or a restaurant maybe if you smell baking bread, or maybe we're outside or the window's open if you're smelling cut grass. If you hear birds or traffic, that can tell you something about where you are in the world, where your character is. Maybe you're riding on a bus and you can feel the vibration of that engine, or you're in a kayak and the river is moving you along faster than you like, right? So if you're feeling these things, if you're using sight, sound, smell, taste, sensation, and then also intuition, right? Then we can see where we are without being told so much where we are. And you can also balance interiority, which is characters' feelings, thoughts, and anything that doesn't get physically expressed in their world with exposition, which is what we're told by the narrator. So if you offer a mix of character thoughts and narrator insights about place and setting, then it won't just be like saying it was a dark and stormy night. It can be like, oh wow, it's so dark and stormy out here, right? And the character is actually interacting with it, sheltering against it, running through it, right? And then we can see and feel it at the same time, which will make a bigger impact overall. I think this is my last, when I'm saying the last slide. Didn't show up quite right there, but realizing the unreal. So again, like I'm not advocating at all for having only realistic worlds or realistic settings, but no matter where you are, you want the place that you're describing to be textural, to have those sensory attributes. So Cameron Hurley in Lightspeed magazine said this I thought was relevant. She said, I'm not going to tell you how to start a bug-powered vehicle, I'm just going to put you inside one with somebody who knows how and send you off on a ride, right? So somebody else is doing it, you're paying attention to their choices. Even imagined places is what we're talking about, these kind of fantastic places, science fiction places, work best when they are textured, physical, experienced through the senses, operate based on their own consistent laws of physics, which don't have to be our laws of physics, and then writers can manipulate those laws but not ignore them, right? Once you set them up, then your characters have to interact with them, right, in some way. And if they overcome them, there should be probably a reason as to why they do that. World building, and I mentioned this at the very beginning, is required for every fictional universe, whether it's set in a familiar universe or not, but especially for these kind of categories, right? We definitely want to know if we're historical and futuristic fiction are sort of two sides of the same coin. If I'm back in medieval Europe, like I still need to know like what things are smelling like, tasting like, and it's just as distant from me as a world 200 years from now when I get into my smart car and beam to work or whatever it is, right? So we need to know regardless of when we are, how things work. Science and climate fiction, right? Those kinds of things need to be set up in a very textural way. If we're in an alternative reality or history, some history that is somehow different than what we think we know, right? We need to know what's different about those spaces. Historical fiction is so great because there are like landmarks of like events that we think we know happen, but then there's so many gaps in between. How we get from place to place, or how we get from thing that happened to thing that happened that's in the history books. That's where the fiction writer can really dig in and experiment with people's behind doors interactions and understandings. Fantasy universes certainly need to have this textural sensibility. Steampunk or speculative fiction or magical realism, westerns, right? It's a great example for showing kind of the difference between the way that we exist in the West now, which is versus the that kind of particular era, which is really only like a 50 or 60 year span or something that a lot of westerns take place in, like that kind of tumultuous period, right? And then some horror, right? So like anything that kind of veers from reality, those places definitely We need to know what's different about that universe than the universe we think we know. But even in our own universe, we need to know how does this character see it, perceive it, because it might be different than me. And this is another optional thing, and this relates back to your anthology. And again, if you want to do it now, that's fine. And if you want to do it later, that's fine. But I'm thinking about people writing about Lubbock. If you've lived in Lubbock for more than 10 years, it might be interesting to try and describe the city or one of its landmarks or its neighborhoods in the voice of somebody who's arriving here for the very first time, either to visit or to live. It's a different experience of coming for 3 days in Lubbock and then going home versus like, okay, here I am, and now how do I fit, right, depending on where I come from. And if you've lived here for a long time, it'd be interesting to think about what would a visitor think about when they come to this place. What would they be reacting to? What would they be grateful for? What would they miss? If you've lived in Lubbock for fewer than 10 years, it might be interesting for you to describe the city or one of its landmarks or neighborhoods in the voice of someone who was born here and plans to never leave. So depending on how long you've been here, I don't know how many people fall into that fewer than 10 years category besides Linda over there. Yeah, and you too as well. So you have opportunity to imagine what it would have been like to be born here, what it would be like for this to be your home space, whether like Leroy in that previous exercise where he's seeing the subdivision spread out and he's not happy about it, or if it's comforting to be here for so long and to see the way that Lubbock has changed or grown, right? A lot of people tell me about how like 50th used to be kind of the edge of town or something, right? And I mean, I've even experienced that a little bit, like driving my dog out to a pet resort and seeing basically, I forget which street it was, 114th or something like that, where there was like asphalt on one side of the intersection and dirt on the other. It's like, wow, the edge of the city. But it's not the edge anymore, I'm 100% sure. So, yeah, the place has changed, right? For the better or the worse. So, if you've been here a while, think about what it would be like to be new here. And if you've been here just for a few years, what would it be like to have lived here and have this be your home space? So, I don't know that if we have time, it's like, 10 minutes now, we'll leave room for questions. So I'm going to leave that with you. These are just a few of my home spaces, places that I've lived in my life that I put up there. But that's my email. Feel free to reach out to me if you need anything, have any questions, or if you're interested in the creative writing program, the tech, or anything like that, or the Texas Tech University Press. I'm happy to talk about that too. But does anybody have any questions, whether any of that stuff, or the presentation, or anything? Well, this was so fun. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
All right, folks, you need to get out your billfolds, take some money over to the raffle, because it's kind of dry over there. So if you would, the raffle is to help us with our presentations and with awards that we give and anything else that we can dream up. I want to remind you again to, if you've got a suitcase that you want to donate, if you'll call me, I will be glad to come by and pick it up. I don't have anything going on much this next week. And this is a great time for you to replace your luggage anyway for vacations. And but I have volunteered to come pick up luggage for anybody else that needs it. So my phone number, if you want to write it down real quick, 806 of course, 470 0707. I have 007 in my phone number. And write down that's DK. That's DK's number. And I will come by your house. Just send me the Google map. I'll be there. That's it. And I'm available for bar mitzvahs and weddings. If you need somebody to
week I'm dropping
do something silly. I can help you out. And if you're willing and interested, we will go to Cortese here. I've made our reservations at 12:30, so we've got plenty of time
Where are we going?
to get over there. We all eat lunch at Cortese, usually after our meetings. And okay. All right. Yeah. Well, I don't know about y'all, but I'm ready for a cocktail. Yes, run the coke. All right, great meeting. Lovely to see everybody. It's summertime, so we're a little sparse. Tell your friends and neighbors that if they're riders, that they need to come and check us out because we got some great people here. All right, Miss Linda. Okay.
Jody Thomas is good.
Oh, good. Okay, here we go. Number 75. 757819. Woo-hoo! I got a thing from Jody on Facebook yesterday. They were talking about the widows of, yeah, and boy, that looked good. The widows of Wichita County. Okay, widows of Wichita County. It was a birthday, an anniversary of that book. It's a Main Street novel, one of those few she's written. And keep looking for her series, Netflix. Her Netflix series, Ransom Canyon. I've heard the last time I heard it'll be starting. They will start showing it in January. Last time I heard. Okay.
Okay, this is a writing book, plot and characterization and all kinds of stuff. But
Ooh, trees. Okay, 757810. Hey, Brandon. You got 4 earrings for your wife.
Hey, you know, I'm not aware.
They'll look good on you.
It's
That's right. We got candy. Candy and cookies. Honey. Ooh. Yeah, cookies. Okay. Tea. Honey, tea, and cookies. Oh, somebody's got a snack here. Okay. 757848. 7848. You got it. Woohoo!
all right.
Yay!
Oh, I don't think that this is okay, here's a sad thing here. All this even this. Okay.
We've got sunglasses and a loaf of fresh bread. I just took it out of the oven at 11 o'clock last night.
Oh, that's so big. Ooh.
Okay.
Delicious.
And the winner is, is 757828.
I win.
All right.
You don't get the sunglasses.
Yeah, and those are $1 lots of glasses. Yay. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and everybody will, if you'll just meet us over at the Cortese at 12:30.
period.